The envelope felt heavy in my hands, though it was empty. It was the 3rd of the month, and my bank account was staring back at me with a single-digit balance that made my stomach churn. I was an illustrator, and usually I scraped by, but 2 major clients had ghosted me in the same week, leaving me high, dry, and terrifyingly short on rent. I looked up at the ceiling of my studio apartment. Somewhere above me, on the top floor of this beautifully restored brownstone, lived the owner, Allison. I didn't know much about Allison. I knew she was a few years older than me, perhaps in her mid-30s. I knew she dressed in sharp, tailored blazers that cost more than my car. And I knew she had a reputation for being strictly business. When I moved in, the lease signing had been brief, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. She had icy blue eyes that seemed to look right through you, assessing your net worth in a single glance. Or so I thought. Asking her for an extension felt like walking to the gallows, but eviction felt like the guillotine. I had no choice. I took a shaky breath, smoothed down my paint-stained jeans I hadn't even thought to change, and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to the penthouse door. My hand hovered over the brass knocker for a full minute before I finally let it fall. Clack, clack, clack. The silence stretched. I was about to turn away, half relieved, when the doors swung open. Allison stood there. She wasn't in her usual power suit. She was wearing a loose silk charcoal robe, her hair damp and pulled back loosely. She looked softer, but her expression was still unreadable. "Sandra," she said, her voice cool, "is everything all right with the unit? A pipe burst?" "No, no pipe," I stammered, gripping my elbows. "Everything is fine. The apartment is great. I actually needed to talk to you about the rent." Allison's eyebrow arched, just a fraction. She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "Go on." "I'm short," I blurted out, the shame burning my cheeks. 2 clients didn't pay. I have the money coming, I swear, but it won't be here for another 2 weeks. I know the lease says late fees apply after the 5th and eviction proceedings start after the 10th, but I'm begging you, I just need a little time. I waited for the lecture. I waited for her to tell me that a contract is a contract. Instead, she sighed. It wasn't a sound of annoyance, but of exhaustion. She looked at me, really looked at me, her eyes scanning my messy bun and the specks of cerulean blue paint on my collarbone. "Come inside," she said, turning and walking into the apartment. I froze. What? "I'm not discussing finances in the hallway. Come inside." I followed her. Her apartment was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and shelves upon shelves of vintage books. But it was also cluttered. Boxes were stacked everywhere. The smell of sawdust hung in the air. Allison walked to her kitchen island and poured a glass of water. "You're an artist, right, Sandra? An illustrator?" "Yes," I said, standing awkwardly by a stack of books. "And you're good with your hands? Detail-oriented?" I suppose so. I have to be." Allison turned to face me. She took a sip of water, the silence stretching out until my nerves were fraying. "Okay, here is the situation. I can give you the extension. I can even waive the late fee." My knees almost buckled with relief. "Thank you. Oh my God, Allison, thank you. I promise." "But," she interrupted, raising a hand, "I have a proposition, a deal." The words from the caption of a bad movie flashed in my mind, but Allison's face was deadly serious, almost weary. "I bought a collection of rare botanical prints at an auction last week," she said, gesturing to the boxes. "Hundreds of them. They need to be cataloged, inspected for damage, and carefully framed for an exhibit I'm sponsoring next month. I've been trying to do it myself after work, but I'm drowning. My assistant doesn't have the eye for it." She looked at me intensely. "If you help me, 2 hours every evening for the next 2 weeks, I'll freeze your rent payment until the end of the month. No fees. And if you do a good job, I'll knock $500 off next month's total." I stared at her. It wasn't charity, it was a barter, and frankly, it was a lifeline. "You want me to frame prints?" I asked.
I want you to handle the art because you respect art, she said simply. Do we have a deal? Yes, I breathed. Yes, absolutely. The first night was awkward. I went upstairs at 7 p.m. sharp. Allison had set up a large work table in her living room. We worked in silence for the first hour, me carefully handling the delicate yellowed paper of 19th century floral diagrams, her typing furiously on a laptop at the dining table. But the silence wasn't hostile. It was companionable. Around 8:30, she closed her laptop. I'm making tea. Earl Grey. Do you want some? Sure, I said, not looking up from a print of a Lilium candidum. These are incredible, by the way. The line work is exquisite. I felt her presence behind me before I saw her. She leaned over my shoulder to look at the print, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something like sandalwood and rain. That's my favorite one, she murmured. Her voice was lower than usual, stripped of her landlord persona. The artist was a woman who traveled alone through the Andes in the 1880s. Everyone told her she couldn't do it. I turned my head and found her face inches from mine. She proved them wrong, I whispered. Allison's eyes flickered down to my lips, then back up to my eyes. She pulled abruptly away, clearing her throat. Right, tea. By the fourth night, the deal had started to feel less like a transaction and more like the highlight of my day. We fell into a rhythm. I would arrive and we would work, but the silence had been replaced by conversation. I learned that Allison wasn't just a landlord, she was a historian and an archivist. The suits were armor she wore to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field. I learned she had a dry, sarcastic humor that could make me laugh until my sides hurt. I learned she hated cooking, but loved good wine, which she started sharing with me during our sessions. You know, I said on the 10th night, we were sitting on the floor now, the framing finished, just organizing the final stack. I was terrified of you before this. Allison chuckled, twirling a pen between her fingers. Terrified? Why? You have a very intense resting face. I thought you were going to evict me for breathing too loud. She smiled, a genuine soft smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. It transformed her face completely. I noticed you the day you moved in, Sandra. My heart did a traitorous little flip. You did? Hard to miss, Sandra, she said. You were wearing bright yellow dungarees and carrying a massive canvas up 3 flights of stairs by yourself. I wanted to offer to help, but, well, I didn't want to overstep. Boundaries, you know? Landlord, tenant. Boundaries, I repeated, feeling the weight of the word. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. We were sitting close, our knees almost touching on the Persian rug. The deal was almost over. My check had cleared that morning. I had the money to pay her. So, I said quietly, I finished the last box and my client paid me today. I can write you the check for the rent. Allison's smile faded slightly. She looked at the stack of finished prints, then back at me. Right, the deal is done. Yeah. A heavy silence settled over us. It was the realization that, technically, I had no reason to come back up here tomorrow. The transactional wall that had protected us was coming back up. Allison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. You did excellent work, Sandra. The exhibit is going to be perfect. I enjoyed it, I said, standing up too. I hesitated. I enjoyed this, hanging out with you. She didn't turn around. Did you? Allison. I took a step toward her. I realized I don't want the deal to be over. I mean, I want to pay my rent, obviously, but I don't want to stop seeing you. She turned then. The moonlight from the window caught the sharp angle of her jaw. She looked vulnerable, stripped of her authority. I told myself I shouldn't mix business with pleasure, she admitted softly. I told myself you were just desperate for rent time and I was taking advantage of that to get to know you. Is that what you were doing? I asked, stepping closer. Getting to know me? Maybe, she whispered. I made up the deadline, Sandra. The exhibit isn't for another 3 months. When you knocked on my door, you looked so scared, and I realized it was the only excuse I'd ever have to invite you in. My heart hammered against my ribs. You didn't need an excuse. You just needed to ask. I'm asking now, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The rent is paid, the work is done, but would you like to stay? Not for work, just for us. I didn't answer with words. I closed the distance between us. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek. Her skin was warm. She leaned into my touch, her eyes fluttering shut, letting out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 2 weeks. I'd love to stay, I whispered. When she kissed me, it wasn't tentative. It was the culmination of 2 weeks of stolen glances and unspoken words over dusty botanical prints. It was soft and slow and felt like coming home. As we pulled apart, breathless, Allison arrested her forehead against mine. Does this mean I get a discount on rent? I joked weakly. She laughed, a low, throaty sound that vibrated through me. Don't push your luck, tenant, but I might be persuaded to cook you breakfast. I thought you hated cooking. For the right person, she said, brushing a stray hair behind my ear, I can make an exception. I looked at the woman who I thought held the keys to my apartment and realized she held the keys to so much more. The deal had indeed changed my life, just not in the way I expected. I hadn't just bought myself time, I had found a future.